For years, Prince Edward attended Queen Camilla's private dinners without attracting attention. Then, almost overnight, he stopped appearing. No announcement, no explanation, no public disagreement. But when Edward finally revealed why he had quietly stepped away, it exposed tensions that had been building behind palace doors for far longer than anyone realized. What seemed like a simple social decision was, according to royal insiders, the beginning of something much larger. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, almost nobody paid attention. Prince Edward had always been known as one of the monarchy's most dependable and least controversial figures, a royal who preferred quiet service over public drama. For years, his presence at Queen Camilla's private gatherings had been considered routine. He attended without fanfare, rarely attracting headlines, and seemed content to remain far from the spotlight that often followed other members of the family. Yet sometime in recent years, something changed. Palace insiders reportedly began noticing that Edward's name was quietly disappearing from guest lists. Invitations continued to circulate, familiar faces continued to attend. But Edward was nowhere to be found. Those closest to royal circles allegedly observed the pattern long before the public caught on, though few were willing to discuss it openly. The silence itself became part of the mystery. No official explanation emerged from the palace. No spokesperson offered clarification. Courtiers reportedly dismissed questions whenever they surfaced, insisting there was nothing unusual about shifting schedules and personal commitments. Yet the more those concerns were brushed aside, the more speculation grew. Royal correspondents who had followed the family for decades began whispering that Edward's absence felt different. This was not the sort of temporary change caused by travel, illness, or routine obligations. According to several observers, it carried the unmistakable feeling of a deliberate decision. The problem was that nobody knew why. As months passed, the mystery deepened. Every dinner Edward missed seemed to generate fresh questions. Some insiders claimed there had been disagreements behind closed doors. Others suggested the issue involved competing visions for the monarchy's future. A few even hinted that tensions had been building for years beneath a carefully maintained surface of unity. Whatever the truth was, those who worked closest to the institution appeared unusually determined to keep it hidden. That only fueled curiosity further. If nothing was wrong, many wondered, why was everyone working so hard to avoid discussing it? Then came the revelation that changed everything. When Edward finally addressed the matter, even indirectly, his explanation sent shockwaves through royal circles. What many had assumed was a personal preference suddenly appeared connected to something much bigger. His words raised uncomfortable questions about loyalty, influence, and the unseen relationships shaping decisions at the highest levels of the monarchy. More importantly, they hinted that his absence was not the result of a single disagreement, but rather the culmination of concerns that had been growing quietly over a very long period. And as royal observers began piecing together the timeline, a far more complicated story started to emerge, one that stretched back years and suggested Edward's decision was never spontaneous at all. But Edward's decision did not happen overnight. It was the result of a series of events that quietly unfolded over several years. At first glance, the dinners appeared harmless, small gatherings filled with conversation, laughter, and trusted guests. Yet some royal watchers believed they served another purpose entirely: strengthening alliances and shaping influence away from the public eye. For a long time, Queen Camilla's private dinners occupied a unique place within royal life. They were never official state functions, never major public events, and rarely generated headlines. Instead, they existed in a quieter world, one built on personal relationships, trusted friendships, and conversations that unfolded far from public scrutiny. To outsiders, they appeared completely ordinary. Guests would gather, discuss current events, exchange opinions, and enjoy the kind of social atmosphere that has always existed around royal circles. But according to those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy, these gatherings gradually evolved into something much more significant than simple dinners. As the years passed, A recognizable group of attendees reportedly began appearing with increasing frequency. Influential advisors, longtime associates, respected social figures, and individuals with strong connections to various royal interests became familiar names within these private circles. Many viewed the gatherings as opportunities to strengthen relationships and maintain unity during periods of uncertainty. At the time, Prince Edward himself appeared supportive of those efforts. Known throughout the family as one of the monarchy's most dependable figures, Edward valued harmony and rarely involved himself in unnecessary disputes. If these dinners encouraged cooperation and strengthened family bonds, he saw little reason to object. But beneath that calm surface, subtle changes were beginning to emerge. Some palace insiders reportedly started questioning why certain individuals seemed to gain increasing access, while others quietly faded from view. The guest lists, once broad and relatively predictable, allegedly became more selective over time. Invitations appeared to favor specific circles and particular voices. Few people discussed it openly, yet whispers slowly spread through royal corridors. Was this simply a natural evolution of a social gathering, or was something more deliberate taking shape behind the scenes? At first, Edward reportedly dismissed such concerns. He had spent decades navigating royal life and understood that speculation often flourished where information was limited. Yet the questions did not disappear. Instead, they multiplied. Certain conversations reportedly began carrying a different tone. Discussions that once focused on family, tradition, and shared responsibilities increasingly centered on influence, access, and relationships with individuals positioned close to important decisions. While none of this appeared dramatic on the surface, Edward allegedly found himself paying closer attention. What troubled him most was not any single event, but a growing pattern. According to royal observers, he began noticing that the same names appeared repeatedly, while others who had once been welcome seemed noticeably absent. The shift was gradual enough to avoid immediate attention, yet significant enough to raise concerns among those watching closely. Questions about who was gaining influence, who was losing it, and why those changes were happening reportedly became impossible to ignore. The atmosphere surrounding the dinners no longer felt exactly as it once had. For a man who valued fairness, duty, and balance above all else, these developments created an uncomfortable dilemma. Edward remained outwardly loyal and respectful, but privately, he was allegedly beginning to reevaluate what these gatherings truly represented. What had once seemed like a harmless effort to maintain unity now appeared far more complicated. And as new faces continued to gain prominence, while familiar relationships shifted in unexpected ways, Edward found himself paying attention to details he had previously overlooked. The deeper he looked, the more difficult it became to dismiss what he was seeing. As the guest lists evolved, Edward reportedly started noticing patterns that would eventually force him to reconsider his involvement. According to those familiar with palace circles, there was no dramatic confrontation, no public argument, and no slammed doors. Instead, Edward's doubts emerged quietly through a series of moments that seemed insignificant on their own but impossible to ignore when viewed together. That was perhaps what made the situation so unsettling. If there had been a single explosive disagreement, a harsh exchange of words, or a clear act of betrayal, the story would have been much easier to understand. But this was different. The concerns that slowly took root in Prince Edward's mind arrived piece by piece, hidden within ordinary conversations and seemingly routine interactions. Nothing appeared serious enough to trigger immediate alarm. Yet over time, those individual moments began connecting into a larger picture. And once Edward saw that picture, it reportedly became impossible for him to look away. By this stage, the dinners had already evolved beyond the informal gatherings they once were. According to royal insiders, discussions increasingly centered on influence, relationships, and future positioning within royal circles. Conversations that once focused on shared responsibilities and family unity allegedly started carrying a different undertone. There was growing interest in who held access, who possessed influence, and who might benefit from shifting dynamics within the institution. None of these topics were necessarily inappropriate on their own. In fact, they often appeared perfectly ordinary. But for Edward, who had spent decades placing duty above personal ambition, the emphasis reportedly felt increasingly uncomfortable. What troubled him most was the gradual questioning of traditions he had spent his life protecting. Those familiar with palace culture claim that certain long-standing customs, once treated as untouchable foundations of royal life, began facing more open scrutiny. Some viewed such discussions as harmless modernization. Others saw them as practical responses to changing times. Yet Edward allegedly viewed them through a very different lens. To him, tradition was not merely habit. It was the framework that allowed the monarchy to survive generation after generation. When those foundations appeared to be treated as negotiable, concerns reportedly started growing within him. The tension was not always obvious. In fact, many people around him may never have realized it existed at all. Edward remained polite. He remained loyal. He continued fulfilling his responsibilities with the same quiet discipline that had defined his entire public life. But beneath that calm exterior, an internal struggle was reportedly intensifying. The values he believed should guide the institution increasingly seemed at odds with viewpoints gaining prominence in certain circles. What some considered harmless discussions about influence and relationships, Edward allegedly viewed as distractions from the monarchy's larger purpose. As these differences deepened, trusted relationships reportedly became strained. Not broken, but altered. Conversations that once felt effortless allegedly became more guarded. Areas of disagreement remained carefully hidden from public view, protected by the same culture of discretion that has long defined royal life. To outsiders, everything appeared unchanged, yet behind closed doors, subtle divisions were quietly taking shape. There were no headlines announcing them, no official acknowledgments, and no public signs of conflict. That secrecy only made the situation more complicated. Without open confrontation, concerns remained unresolved, lingering beneath the surface and growing stronger with time. Eventually, Edward reportedly began creating distance between himself and certain gatherings. At first, the changes were small enough to escape attention. A missed invitation here, an absence there, nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded explanation. But each decision reflected a growing unease that could no longer be ignored. He was not walking away because of one person, one disagreement, or one event. He was responding to a pattern that had slowly reshaped how he viewed those gatherings and the influence surrounding them. And the more those patterns revealed themselves, the more difficult his position became. The deeper Edward looked, the more he felt caught between loyalty to family and loyalty to the institution itself. Few members of the royal family have built their reputation on quiet service more than Prince Edward. But there comes a moment when silence itself becomes a choice. And Edward was approaching that moment faster than anyone realized. For most of his life, Prince Edward had avoided the battles that often consumed royal headlines. While others found themselves at the center of controversy, Edward cultivated a reputation built on discipline, consistency, and duty. He rarely sought attention and seldom invited conflict. To many within royal circles, he represented a fading ideal of service, someone who viewed the monarchy not as a platform for personal influence, but as a responsibility that demanded sacrifice. That belief had guided him for decades. Yet now it was also becoming the source of a profound internal struggle. The concerns that had quietly accumulated over time were no longer easy to dismiss. What began as isolated observations had developed into a growing sense that something important was shifting around him. According to palace insiders, Edward increasingly found himself questioning whether he could continue participating in situations that made him uncomfortable without compromising the principles he had spent a lifetime defending. The challenge was not simply about attending dinners or maintaining social connections. It was about what those gatherings had come to represent in his mind. Every invitation seemed to carry a deeper question. Was he supporting family unity, or was he becoming associated with developments that conflicted with his understanding of the monarchy's purpose? That dilemma reportedly weighed heavily on him. Unlike more public disputes that erupt into open confrontation, this was a deeply personal conflict. Edward's loyalty to his family remained strong. He understood the importance of preserving relationships and avoiding unnecessary division. Yet he also believed that the institution itself demanded protection. Those two loyalties were no longer perfectly aligned. The more he reflected on what he had observed, the harder it became to reconcile them. Remaining involved offered stability and avoided uncomfortable questions. Stepping away, however, risked creating exactly the kind of speculation he had spent years avoiding. According to those familiar with the situation, several senior figures quietly encouraged caution. Discretion had always been one of the monarchy's most valuable tools, and many believed any concerns should remain private. There was an understanding that public perceptions mattered, particularly during periods when the royal family faced growing scrutiny. Edward reportedly listened carefully to that advice. He understood the consequences of every choice before him. Yet understanding those consequences did not make the decision any easier. In fact, it may have made it more painful. As time passed, his absences reportedly became more frequent and increasingly difficult to ignore. What had once seemed occasional now appeared deliberate. People who attended the gatherings began noticing the empty space where Edward's presence had once been expected. Questions surfaced quietly. Rumors followed. Yet despite the growing curiosity, Edward remained silent. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. Instead, he continued carrying out his duties while privately wrestling with a decision that was becoming impossible to postpone. At its heart, the choice reflected everything that had defined his public life. It was not driven by anger, resentment, or personal ambition. It emerged from values he had upheld for decades: service, responsibility, and an unwavering belief that the monarchy must always stand above individual interests. Those principles had brought him to a crossroads. One path preserved comfort and avoided tension. The other risked misunderstandings, strained relationships, and difficult consequences. But as the pressure mounted, Edward reportedly realized that continuing as before was no longer an option. Eventually, Edward made a decision that would send a message without saying a single word publicly. There was no official statement, no dramatic palace briefing. Yet Edward's empty seat began speaking louder than any press release ever could. At first, the absence seemed easy to explain away. Members of the royal family often missed social gatherings because of scheduling conflicts, official engagements, or private commitments. One missed dinner attracted little attention. Two passed with only quiet curiosity. But as the pattern continued, something changed. Palace observers who followed royal movements closely began noticing that Prince Edward was no longer appearing at gatherings where his attendance had once been almost guaranteed. The silence surrounding the situation was striking. Nobody offered an explanation, and nobody appeared eager to ask questions publicly. Yet behind closed doors, people were already asking them. The mystery grew because Edward was not known for making symbolic gestures. Throughout his public life, he had built a reputation for consistency and restraint. He was not a royal who sought attention through dramatic decisions or public statements. That was precisely why his absence carried so much weight. The more frequently he stayed away, the harder it became to dismiss it as coincidence. According to those familiar with royal circles, conversations about his decision quietly spread among palace staff, advisors, and longtime observers. What had started as curiosity soon evolved into speculation. Royal correspondents reportedly became increasingly interested in the developing situation. Many had spent years watching the intricate relationships that shaped life within the monarchy, and they understood that silence could sometimes reveal more than words. The lack of any official explanation only intensified interest. Questions began circulating about whether Edward's absence reflected a personal disagreement, a broader concern, or something far more significant. Theories emerged, but concrete answers remained elusive. Each new gathering he missed added another layer to the mystery. According to insiders, efforts were allegedly made to keep attention away from the issue. Whenever questions surfaced, they were quietly redirected. Publicly, There was little indication that anything unusual was happening. The image of family unity remained intact. Yet behind that carefully maintained surface, the rumors continued growing. People who once dismissed the situation as insignificant reportedly began reconsidering their assumptions. If there was truly nothing to discuss, why was so much effort being devoted to avoiding the discussion altogether? Within Queen Camilla's circle, Edward's continued absence allegedly became a growing source of concern. Not necessarily because of what he said very little, but because of what his actions might imply. Edward's reputation for loyalty and discretion meant that people paid attention when he changed course. His decision to stay away was not interpreted as impulsive or emotional. Instead, it appeared measured, deliberate, and deeply considered. That made it difficult to ignore. The longer his absence continued, the more questions emerged about what might be happening beneath the surface. At the same time, speculation about internal divisions intensified. Some believed the situation reflected differing visions for the monarchy's future. Others suspected the issue centered on influence, priorities, or relationships that had become increasingly strained over time. Yet, despite the growing rumors, Edward refused to engage publicly. He remained respectful, professional, and unwavering in his commitment to royal duty. He neither fueled the speculation nor attempted to silence it. Instead, he allowed his actions to speak for themselves while maintaining the dignity that had defined his entire public life. For months, the reasons remained hidden until Edward finally chose to explain what had been weighing on him. When Edward finally addressed the issue, the explanation was not centered on personal dislike or family feuds. Instead, it revealed a much deeper concern about values, priorities, and the future direction of the monarchy. For months, speculation had filled the silence. Observers searched for signs of personal conflict. Commentators debated whether hidden disagreements or strained relationships were responsible for Edward's absence. Some expected a dramatic revelation involving private disputes or long-standing resentments. Others anticipated accusations and blame. What they received instead was something far more surprising. According to those familiar with his remarks, Edward's explanation was remarkably measured, almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. He did not focus on individuals. He did not attack anyone. He did not attempt to settle scores. Instead, he spoke about principles, and in doing so, he transformed the entire conversation. Those who listened closely reportedly realized that Edward's concerns had never been centered on personalities. His focus was on the institution itself. Throughout his life, he had viewed the monarchy as something larger than any single individual. It was a responsibility passed from one generation to the next, protected by traditions, discipline, and a shared understanding of purpose. According to royal insiders, Edward increasingly felt that certain boundaries which once seemed clear had become blurred. The issue, as he reportedly saw it, was not who held influence, but how that influence was being exercised and what it ultimately meant for the monarchy's future. That distinction changed everything. Suddenly, years of speculation took on a different meaning. What many had interpreted as a personal disagreement now appeared to reflect a much broader concern. Edward allegedly believed that some conversations and relationships were beginning to place too much emphasis on individual interests rather than institutional responsibilities. While others viewed those developments as harmless or even beneficial, Edward reportedly worried about where such changes might eventually lead. The monarchy, in his view, depended on maintaining a careful balance. Once that balance shifted too far in one direction, restoring it could become extraordinarily difficult. His comments reportedly surprised even those who had followed the story closely. There was no bitterness in his explanation, no dramatic accusations, no attempt to assign blame. Instead, there was a quiet but unmistakable warning. According to observers, Edward's message suggested that protecting the monarchy sometimes required difficult choices, even when those choices created discomfort within the family itself. That perspective resonated strongly with many supporters, who praised his commitment to duty and his willingness to prioritize principle over convenience. Yet not everyone reacted the same way. Critics questioned whether his decision had unintentionally deepened divisions that might otherwise have remained manageable. Some argued that stepping away solved little and risked creating new tensions where dialogue could have been more productive. Others wondered whether the relationships affected by his absence could ever fully recover. The questions were complicated, and the answers remained uncertain. What nobody could deny, however, was the impact of his revelation. It had fundamentally altered how people understood the story. The mystery surrounding Edward's absence no longer revolved around who had offended whom. Instead, it became a debate about values, influence, and the direction of an institution facing enormous challenges. His explanation did not close the discussion. In many ways, it opened an entirely new one. Because if a figure as careful and loyal as Edward felt compelled to take such a stand, many began wondering what that said about the deeper dynamics unfolding behind palace walls. And as those questions spread through royal circles, the implications reached far beyond a series of private dinners. But Edward's revelation did more than explain his absence. It reignited debate about the future balance of power inside the royal family. What began as one prince quietly declining dinner invitations soon evolved into a much bigger conversation about influence, loyalty, and leadership at the highest levels of the monarchy. Once Edward's explanation entered the public conversation, the story took on a life of its own. What had previously been viewed as a private matter suddenly became a subject of intense discussion throughout royal circles. The focus was no longer simply on where Edward chose to spend his evenings. Instead, attention shifted toward the deeper questions his actions had raised. Why had someone so respected, so measured, and so devoted to royal duty felt compelled to distance himself in the first place? And if he had reached that conclusion, what did it reveal about the pressures quietly shaping the institution behind the scenes? According to palace observers, reactions among senior royal circles were immediate and, in some cases, surprisingly strong. While few were willing to discuss the matter publicly, insiders described a growing sense of unease. Edward's reputation made the situation impossible to dismiss. This was not a figure known for dramatic gestures or impulsive decisions. Throughout decades of service, he had earned a reputation for integrity, discretion, and unwavering commitment to the crown. Because of that, his actions carried weight far beyond the immediate circumstances. People paid attention not because Edward sought influence, but because he rarely acted without careful consideration. As discussions intensified, long-standing debates about influence and accountability reportedly resurfaced. Questions that had remained largely unspoken suddenly moved closer to the center of royal conversations. Who should shape the monarchy's future? How much influence should informal networks hold? Where should the boundaries between personal relationships and institutional responsibilities be drawn? These were not new questions, but Edward's decision gave them renewed urgency. His absence had transformed from a private choice into a symbol of something much larger. What surprised many observers was the range of support his position appeared to attract. According to those familiar with palace sentiment, individuals from different corners of royal life found themselves agreeing with aspects of his concerns. Some admired his willingness to act according to principle, even when doing so carried personal consequences. Others viewed his decision as a reminder that loyalty to the institution sometimes requires uncomfortable sacrifices. While opinions remained divided, support reportedly emerged from unexpected quarters, adding another layer of complexity to an already sensitive situation. At the same time, the growing attention created fresh tensions. Palace insiders described an atmosphere where uncertainty seemed to linger just beneath the surface. No one could predict what consequences, if any, would follow. Some believed the controversy would gradually fade. Others suspected it had exposed divisions that could not easily be ignored. The fact that so many conversations remained private only fueled further speculation. Every unanswered question seemed to generate two more. Beyond palace walls, public fascination intensified. Royal watchers who had initially viewed the story as a minor social dispute now saw it through a different lens. It had become a window into larger issues involving power, influence, and the future direction of the monarchy. Commentators debated its significance. Supporters and critics offered competing interpretations. Yet, regardless of where people stood, few could deny that Edward's decision had become symbolic of broader tensions that extended far beyond a single series of dinners. The story was no longer just about attendance. It was about values. It was about leadership. It was about the delicate balance between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Most importantly, it raised questions that would not disappear simply because the headlines eventually moved on. Because once those questions had been asked, they became impossible to ignore, and their answers could shape the monarchy's future in ways few people yet fully understood. As the dust began to settle, attention shifted toward what Edward's decision might mean for the monarchy moving forward. In royal history, some of the most important statements are never delivered from a podium. Sometimes they are made through actions alone, and Prince Edward's decision may become one of those defining moments. As the controversy surrounding his absence gradually settled into the background, a different realization began to emerge. The story had never truly been about dinner invitations, guest lists, or private gatherings. Those details merely formed the surface of a much deeper issue. What endured was the message embedded within Edward's actions. Without holding a press conference, issuing a declaration, or engaging in public criticism, he had managed to spark one of the most significant conversations about duty and influence in recent royal memory. That alone spoke volumes. In an era where public figures often rush to explain themselves, Edward chose a different path. He allowed his decisions to carry the weight of his convictions. For many observers, that approach perfectly reflected the reputation he had spent decades building. Throughout his royal career, Edward had rarely sought recognition. His contributions often unfolded far from headlines, shaped by persistence rather than publicity. While others attracted attention through controversy or visibility, he became known for something far less dramatic, but ultimately far more enduring: quiet service. That reputation gave extraordinary power to his absence. People paid attention not because Edward demanded attention, but because he almost never invited it. When someone so consistently devoted to stability makes a choice that attracts widespread discussion, people naturally begin asking why. Yet even now, questions remain unanswered. The future relationship between Edward and Queen Camilla continues to inspire speculation among royal watchers. Some believe time will gradually heal any tensions that emerged. Others suspect the differences revealed through this episode run deeper than many initially understood. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What is clear is that the conversation has moved beyond personalities. The focus has shifted toward broader questions about influence, accountability, and the values that should guide the monarchy in the years ahead. That may ultimately be the lasting significance of this entire story. Edward's revelation did not simply explain a personal decision. It challenged assumptions. It encouraged people to examine how influence operates within royal circles and how those dynamics affect the institution's future. Debates that once remained confined to private conversations entered public discussion. Supporters viewed his actions as a reaffirmation of principle. Critics questioned whether his approach risked deepening divisions. Yet regardless of perspective, few could deny that the episode forced a meaningful examination of issues that might otherwise have remained hidden. Years from now, historians and royal commentators may look back on this period and see more than a disagreement over social gatherings. They may see a moment when one of the monarchy's most reserved figures quietly drew a line based on conviction. A moment when actions carried greater force than words. A moment when duty outweighed convenience. Because in the end, the story of Prince Edward's absence became something much larger than anyone anticipated. It became a story about personal integrity in the face of uncertainty, about remaining faithful to deeply held values even when doing so carries consequences, and about the enduring tension between loyalty to individuals and loyalty to an institution. That is why the episode continues to resonate. Not because it delivered easy answers, but because it raised important questions. Questions about leadership, questions about influence, questions about the future of a monarchy navigating an increasingly complex world. And perhaps most importantly, questions about what happens when someone known for silence decides that silence itself is no longer enough. And while the dinners may have ended for Prince Edward, the questions raised by his decision are likely to echo through royal corridors for years to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.